Whoa, whew, that was a close one. I'm Oklahoma Jack, and clearly I just want to be like my hero, Indiana Jones. When I saw the original trilogy, I was inspired to be the knockoff adventurer that I am today. I wasn't too keen on the Crystal Skull, but that's okay. Some fans like me actually consider that to be the fifth movie. That's because the point-and-click adventure game Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis really feels like the true fourth movie. Let's explore that.
All right, Jones, how are you gonna find that statue and all this junk?
This is how Fate of Atlantis begins, in media res, with Indy crashing through a window while searching for some sort of statue.
It's a brilliant way to show the credits. I really admired how they made that so fun and enjoyable.
And that is JR Ralls, my guest/fellow adventurer on this journey to Atlantis.
Hi, I'm JR Ralls of 30-2010, the podcast where we talk about what was happening 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and 10 years ago this week. You can find it on the Laser Time Network and wherever your podcasts are found. I also ran Talking Terrific Television, a chronological examination of The Sopranos that had the fantastic luck of premiering 2 weeks before Talking Sopranos premiered, which featured the actors and producers and writers from the actual show. So great timing on my part.
Speaking of timing, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis launched right when it was needed the most. It was another entry in a growing catalog of prominent LucasArts point-and-click adventure games, putting it in the company of bona fide classics like Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle, and of course Monkey Island, which it actually predates. Fate of Atlantis was released in 1992, just 3 years after Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which got its own point-and-click adventure game from LucasArts just a few months after the film. Since all of that was under the same Lucasfilm corporate umbrella, tie-in video games were a given, and as it turned out, Last Crusade, the graphic adventure game, was a hit.
It was a different world in 1989. If you loved a piece of media and you watched it in movies, that was it. That's all you got to do. Maybe you could read the novelization if you were lucky. But by getting to play the graphic adventure game of that film, I got to put myself in the shoes of Indiana Jones. And that made my love of the character grow and grow and grow.
Last Crusade was innovative for LucasArts, adding a point system that rewarded players for finding alternate puzzle solutions. As JR said, game mechanics like this really helped players feel like Indy, even if they were only retracing his steps from the pre-existing movie. Just a few years after that game, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles began airing on TV. All of this meant that Indiana Jones fandom was at a fever pitch for those few years, with folks just begging to be given a brand new, grown-up Indy experience.
So I was getting into more and more of an Indy fan with the television show, and then they released Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. And I was in absolute heaven over that.
The game's spot in the Indiana Jones timeline automatically propped it up to feel like a fourth adventure film. But this wasn't just a right place, right time kind of thing. The game itself feels like an Indiana Jones movie. That cold open we showed earlier is just the beginning. And I mean that on a few different levels. And by levels, I'm also referring to a few different levels of meaning. Yeah, I think that made sense. Anyway, the point is, starting in the middle of the action is a staple of the Indiana Jones movies.
You start off at the tail end of the last adventure, get that little amazing wowness factor, and then you move into the plot while your audience is recovering from all of that energy and excitement that they already just had.
For Raiders of the Lost Ark, this excitement is Indy retrieving the Golden Idol and outrunning the boulder, something I see as the single most iconic moment in the entire franchise. For Temple of Doom, it's the nightclub scene in Shanghai. For The Last Crusade, we get Boy Scout Indy escaping from robbers on a moving train. And for Fate of Atlantis, Indy tumbles down through multiple floors of Barnett College to show us the opening credits, teach the basics of point-and-click gameplay, and let us know what we're in for. All of these cold opens signal to the audience and say, hey, strap in, because this is gonna be a true blue adventure.
I still think it's a fake.
Then you won't mind if I take it.
In this case, the adventure begins with Indy getting betrayed by an undercover Nazi agent and worrying that an old flame, Sophia Hapgood, might be the next target. We've got our villain, we've got our love interest, and we're off to New York.
Indiana Jones, to me, is the spirit of adventure. He's the spirit of discovery. It's got to be globetrotting. It's got to be going from place to place, multiple locations, all exotic.
Fate of Atlantis absolutely nails those defining characteristics that JR just named. It takes players all over the world, from Sophia's presentation in New York City to Iceland to Tikal, the Azores, Monte Carlo, Algiers, Thera, Crete, and of course to Atlantis itself. And this is just a broad overview of the plot. One of the most impressive aspects of Fate of Atlantis is its replayability, offering 3 completely different gameplay paths that converge in the final act. We're mostly talking about the game in the context of its relationship to the movies in this video, but as a game itself, there's some serious innovation here, an evolution of what the Last Crusade pulled off. What's more, LucasArts brilliantly used these 3 paths to define the character of Indiana Jones.
You are a remarkable man, Dr. Jones. You possess great strength of character. You are resourceful, always eager to solve life's deepest puzzles.
They deliberately set out, asking the same questions you're asking me. What makes Indiana Jones? And they came up with, team, wits, and fist. And if you look at the Indiana Jones movies, you're going to see all those things involved as well.
Great strength of character. This is the team path, the one that focuses on dialogue and character interaction. Resourcefulness. This is the path of fists, the physical strength that Indy exerts when necessary. Finally, there's an eagerness to solve puzzles. This is the path of wits, the one that, as you can imagine, involves the most intricate puzzle solving.
The man can do it all. Meanwhile, I can barely keep this hat on.
Since we've already met Sophia, let's start with the team path, because it keeps her and Indy close to one another for the majority of the game. This is another key component of an Indiana Jones story.
Indy needs a love interest. He needs an interesting love interest, someone the audience can really care about, someone the audience wants Indy to be with, and someone who has their own goals and mission. To me, Sophia Hapgood makes Fate of Atlantis amazing. If it had not had her, I definitely think I would have been less interested. I thought she was a great character. I thought she has an interesting backstory with Indy. I think the way they clash is interesting. She's a psychic. And good old Indiana Jones, even though he's encountered the supernatural numerous times, is not a big believer in the psychics.
It's a perfect conflict on paper. Sophia the enterprising psychic versus Indy the down-to-earth skeptic. In fact, this skepticism is another defining trait of everyone's favorite archaeologist. More on those little details later. For now, it's important to know that Sophia drifted away from academia due to her fascination with, and eventual possession by, the Atlantean spirit Nurab Sal.
Nurab Sal is on the screen more than any other supernatural in any other Indiana Jones film. If you think about it, the other films, the supernatural is there, but it's not present as a character. Nurab Sal appears a bunch of times, has a influence on the plot as it's ongoing, and he pops out here and there.
Not only does Nurab Sal affect the plot, but we get to invoke his powers ourselves a few times. You see, once the game diverges after the first act, the team path is the only one that lets us play as Sophia again. The first time this happens is in Monte Carlo, where she conducts a seance that helps you gain one of the game's many MacGuffins from Monsieur Trottier.
Very good indeed. Now let's begin our communion with that great spirit.
In this instance, her supernatural inclinations actually help her and Indy achieve their goal. Their rekindled romance continues from there, and if you get the game's best ending, they resolve things exactly how you'd expect. Of course, you'll also have to rescue her a few times along the way. Anyone who likes the punch a Nazi activist motto will appreciate the fact that Indy does a lot of that in this game.
Looks like he's got some rations.
Welcome to the path of fists.
I passed all 3 paths, but fist was a bitch. Fist requires a lot of fist fighting, as the name implies, and that was the weakest part of the game, by far, in my opinion. You know, you're typing numbers, and I can see what they were going for. They were thinking, hey, why don't we just kind of like see if we can make Street Fighter on a keyboard? But there's a reason we don't play Street Fighter on a keyboard, you know?
This is the most action-oriented path in the game, and it has the most combat encounters by far. Like JR said, point-and-click adventure games aren't exactly suited to this. You can get absolutely owned if you make the wrong move.
Arrogant Americana.
In the example I just showed, whipping the gun out of the Nazi's hand is the right move. In fact, there are lots of opportunities to use your whip, but one of the most fun ones happens in the labyrinth on the Isle of Crete. Indy uses it to swing over a pit, a move we also see during the iconic boulder run. He also muscles his way through a stone door in that same labyrinth, further cementing this path as the one that focuses on strength.
Bingo!
This is a good place to talk about the game's handful of vehicle segments too. They're a little different depending on which path you take, but whether you're piloting a hot air balloon, hijacking a submarine, or driving an Atlantean bulldozer, you're participating in another staple of Indiana Jones adventures.
You think of Indiana Jones, you think of the rail cart, you think of him riding a truck, you think of him riding a biplane. You know, there's a lot of vehicles in the Indiana Jones movies. So I guarantee you when they were making the game, they were like, well, let's put in as many interesting vehicles as we could, hence the hot air balloon, hence the submarine.
In the Path of Wits, you'll actually have to assemble the hot air balloon yourself, using a fishing net, a balloon, and some other pieces. That's because this path focuses on perhaps the most defining characteristic of point-and-click adventure games: puzzles.
The Wits path was fun. I really enjoyed that one. A couple of the puzzles were super stumpers.
No disagreement there, JR. I'm not afraid to admit that I had to look up a few puzzle solutions myself. But by the same token, this path is designed to make players feel clever. After all, Dr. Indiana Jones is an archaeologist, so the game has to convey his linguistic, historical, and geographical knowledge. One method is to send players to exclusive areas depending on the path. For Wits, they'll explore the dig site on the volcanic island of Thera. There, they can use the Sunstone, one of the game's recurring MacGuffins, to unearth a hieroglyphic inscription. They'll also have to dig their way back out after a cave-in. One of my favorite puzzles in this path involves tracking a merchant through the streets of Algiers.
That is an also good one, Effendi. I'm his trusted servant, Paul Abdul.
Yep, you heard that name right. Paul Abdul. Must be some relation there. Anyway, tracking Paul is a lot easier if he's wearing a red fez. So once you sweet talk one off another patron of the bazaar, you'll be able to get the ball rolling. See what I did there? In the Path of Fists, Paul is already wearing this hat. Collecting it is an extra step in the puzzle that makes perfect sense when playing through the Path of Wits.
Yeah, I'd say this fits old Paul quite nicely. I like hats.
This is just one of many changes between the three paths, and while they do converge before Indy and Sophia reach Atlantis, they're undeniable proof that LucasArts was building a classic adventure from the start.
I'm with you. I love the differences, and that is one of the reasons I thought it had a higher replay value than most adventure games, is because I did enjoy spotting all those little differences.
Follow Paul in the Path of Wits, and you'll meet a very hostile Omar Al-Jabbar. But in the Path of Fists, you'll actually save him from a Nazi confrontation. Once you exit the city and start exploring the desert, these differences become even more apparent. In the Path of Wits, you can bribe the guards that monitor the sands. With Fists, you have no choice but to fight the Nazis that patrol the same region. And with the team path, you and Sophia will simply cruise along above the dunes in a hot air balloon. Between Team, Wits, and Fists, LucasArts really nailed what it means to be Indiana Jones at a macro level. But there's also a beautiful attention to detail here. I mean, the tagline of my channel is the little things that make big differences in your favorite video games. In this case, there are distinct callbacks and references that Indy fans can really appreciate. Remember in Raiders when Indy uses the Staff of Ra to focus sunlight over a scale model of Cairo? Well, here, he uses the three stones in conjunction with a miniature version of Atlantis. A little before that, when Indy climbs up a chain behind a waterfall in the labyrinth, he states that he hates getting wet. It's a pretty clear callback to this moment from Temple of Doom. My favorite of all of these also takes place in the labyrinth. There's a big Nazi brute who can only be defeated by a massive rolling boulder, one that you set loose. It's an inversion of that iconic moment that we've talked about a few times now.
Your lord.
Ouch.
We've also mentioned Atlantis itself quite a bit, and of course that's the ultimate destination in this game. Let's be honest, I didn't even need to elaborate on how the game compares to the movies. The sheer fact that the game utilizes a world-famous myth like Atlantis is enough proof on its own.
Everyone's heard of Atlantis. I mean, it is one of the most well-known fictional archaeological sites you can name, because you can get the mystical explanation for everything. Oh, why can they make this structure that we don't have the technology to make today? Because they're Atlantis. Why does their architecture look all different? Because they're Atlantis. Why aren't they around anymore? Because they're frickin' Atlantis and they sunk into the goddamn sea. I mean, it's a perfect excuse for everything you'd want in an Indiana Jones film.
It really is. But Lucasfilm didn't just take that fame for granted. The team still took the time to design a game that really did give Indiana Jones fans what they were looking for. It had been 3 years since Last Crusade, and Crystal Skull was still 16 years away. So Fate of Atlantis was simply destined to be an important game in the timeline.
Fate of Atlantis is always going to be Indy 4 in my personal heart. It has everything I wanted in my Indiana Jones films. Great action scenes, lots of vehicles, fantastic female character, exotic locations, globe-trotting, puzzle solving. So yeah, in my heart, absolutely, Fate of Atlantis is the 4th Indiana Jones movie, and I wish they would have just turned it into Indy 4.
All in all, it really does feel like a movie. LucasArts nailed everything you'd want to see from an Indiana Jones adventure, and it did so with a fantastic path system that adds triple the replay value. Not only did LucasArts please movie fans, but they pushed the point-and-click genre forward as well. Despite a few archaic mechanics, Fate of Atlantis is a success on all fronts, and even today it still feels like it belongs in the movie canon. So if you're aching for a return to the classic Indiana Jones trilogy, Fate of Atlantis is just the thing to make you feel better.
What was that for?
To ease the pain.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what Framework is doing, definitely hit that subscribe button in the middle. It would help me out an awful lot if you do. And if you want to see what we've already cooked up, you can hit that link on the far left. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.